Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how you can grade a multiple choice test. So what we're going to do is use a two-dimensional array to store grades from a multiple choice test. Now each student is going to be a row in the array, and then we're going to use a single dimension array to store the answer key for each question, and then we're going to calculate each student's grade and print the result. So how do we approach this problem? Well, we're going to have a two-dimensional array, which is going to look like this. So here's the bounds of our array. Now we're not going to have an index for this, but we're going to have a student. Each row is a student. And then we're going to have, as a multiple choice test, so A, B, D, C, A, whatever. So in each of the rows, we're going to store characters that represent the answer that student gave for the question. And then we're going to have a single dimensional array. And inside here, we're going to store the answer key for the questions. So let's say the answer to question 1 was the first question was really B. Next one was B, D, A, C. So what we can see is that, these correspond to an element in the answer key. And if we think about this, as long as that there is the same number of answers in the student array as there is in the answer key, we can use the same variable to index these into the array. So it becomes a really simple comparison. So now that's probably enough theory for this. Let's go over into Eclipse and code this up. So I've created a new project called Grade Exam and a new class called Grade Exam as well. And I've got Eclipse to generate a main method. So I'm going to maximize this to give us some room. Now, the first thing we need is the actual array that contains the student's answers. Now, this is going to be a character array, and of course, it's going to be two-dimensional, so we need two sets of square brackets. And we're going to call this answers. Now, where do we actually get the answers from? Now, what we'd probably have in a real-life example is we'd probably be reading them in from a file, or several files, or a database, or something like that. For now, we're going to cheat, and here's some I prepared earlier. So here is our two-dimensional array containing our answers. So each row in the array represents a single student. Now, we also need an array that stores our answer key. So this is going to be a single-dimensional array, and we're going to call this keys. And again, here are some answer keys that I prepared earlier. Alright, so now that we've got that, we've got our 2D array that contains the answers from our students, and the single dimensional array which contains our actual answer key. What we need now is a loop to loop through each student. So for int I equals 0, I less than answers dot length I plus plus. Alright, so grade all answers. Now, this loop represents a single student. So what we're going to have now is an inner loop that iterates over each of their answers. So for int, and I'm going to call this j equals 0, j less than answers at I dot length j plus plus. Now, all we need here is a really simple comparison. And what that is if the answer that the student gave at whatever index j happens to be equals the answer in the answer key, then they got that right. So we can increment some variable, which I accidentally forgot to put in. We need an int here to keep track of the student's grade. So correct count equals 0. So we start off, they haven't got anything right. Now, if answers at I, so j, so we take the row that we're up to and j, which will represent the column, or the actual answer, equals keys at j. So if the answer that the student gave at j is equal to the answer key at j, that means that we increment correct. So we're just going to increment that. Now, outside of this inner loop, we are going to print out the grade for that student. So system.out.println student. Now we're just going to have I. So let's imagine I represents a student ID. Correct count is, now I'm just going to break down onto a new line. Correct count. Note that this print line statement is inside the outside loop. So that means that we're going to print out this for each student. So now that's really all we had to do. We've got all our answers from the students as a two-dimensional array. We have our answer key as an array as well. And then we have an inner loop that loops over each student, and then, sorry, an outer loop that loops over each student, an inner loop that loops over their answers, and we're just keeping track of how many they got correct with this simple comparison. So let's run this now and see what we get. So run as Java application. So if I maximize the console, student 0's correct count got 7, so student 0 got 7 correct. Let's have a look at this. Can we verify that that's correct? Well, they didn't get the first question right. That was wrong. B is correct, so that's 1. D is wrong, so C is correct. C is correct again. D is correct. That is incorrect. That is correct. That is correct. That is correct. Now, you can't see me counting on my fingers, but that added up to 7. So that's fantastic. Our program is working. We loop over each student and we print out what their score was. So really, that's all there is to this video. So in this video, we combined a single dimension and a two-dimensional array, depending on what we needed. So we used a 2D array to represent each student and their answers, and we only needed a single dimensional array to represent our actual answer key. We had an inner loop and an outer loop. The outer loop iterated over the students, and the inner loop looped over their answers and compared that with the answer key array. Now, that was kind of important. We can use the same iterator variable for the student's answer as we can to get the answer from the key. So in this case, we used J. And we used variables to keep track of their grade. And this variable was correct count, and this was declared inside this first loop. What that meant was that this gets assigned to 0 each time we loop, so we get the correct number for each student. In other words, we're not incrementing this for all students. That wouldn't make any sense. So with that, that's it for this video. Thanks a lot.